tell me the person that you were, the young man that you were before all this happened to you, I believe when you were 21 years old.
That is correct. If we rewind the tape, so to speak, I was really a good kid. I was brought up as a Christian in a good home. My father wasn't there. My mother was there up until about 11 and a half, 12 years old. She fell into her addiction. And that's when things began to wobble a little bit for me. I began to looking outside of my home for role models, and the neighborhood drug dealers became my role models. By the time I was 16, I found myself selling drugs in the streets, but far from gangs or violence, and most certainly far from anything close to committing homicide.
Exactly, exactly. Drug dealers are not all murderers at all. So that's really an
Absolutely,
important point.
absolutely, yeah.
When was the date of the incident?
It was February 6th, 1996.
All right. So February 6th, 1996, you are living your life, you're hanging out with your girlfriend, you go to your girlfriend's job, you're just living life. You also go to the sheriff's department because you
I
want to
did,
register for a gun because
yes,
it is important for black folks to exercise their Second Amendment rights. So you go
correct.
down there to register for a gun because you are not a convicted felon. But
That
are
is
you on
correct.
probation? Is that accurate? You're on probation?
I was not on probation at that time. No,
Okay, at that time.
I did receive probation after the commission, after February 6th. I believe it was March or April. So during the time, um, older individuals had told me to go register for a legal handgun. Ricky, you're not
That's right.
into no mess. If you're trying to protect yourself, no need to buy a gun off the market or a hot gun. Go get you a legal gun so you can protect your home or protect yourself. And that's what I was doing on February 6th, 1996.
And this is where you are. And there's documentation of this. They actually
Absolutely.
found the application that you filled out that said February 6th. There was actually even in the computer, it said February 6th. I mean,
Yes.
you're literally nowhere. It's
Yes.
impossible for you to commit
Impossible.
to kill two people. So tell me,
Impossible.
so tell me what happens to those two individuals who were killed. From what I gather, there was a 4-year-old in the home. Her father
Hmm.
was killed, and then somebody
Hmm.
else was killed. And you have nothing to do with this. But what did you hear happened that day?
Of course. And so, according to police reports, I'm inside the county jail charged with 2 counts of first degree murder, 2 counts of armed criminal action. And as my 21-year-old mind is processing this, I received my discovery, the police reports, 600 pages of what the detectives have gathered. And as I began to unpack it, we all began to understand or try to better understand what happened on February 6th, 1996. And according to police reports, 3 individuals had pulled up in a late model car, went inside the home, committed this crime, killed the 2 men, left the young 4-year-old, as you stated, and then fled the scene of the crime. Neighbors had seen them coming in, neighbors had seen them leaving out, they had heard the gunshots as well. It was believed to be a drug deal robbery. And so where they was going in to, I guess, take possession of his drugs or money, and then for one reason or another, they made the decision to kill him and the guy that was simply working on the house. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time. So that is essentially what happened. When you talk about the nuts and bolts of this double homicide.
Did you know the victims at all?
I knew all parties
You
actually,
knew all parties.
and that's what makes these wrongful convictions so complex at times. It's hard to compartmentalize what actually happened, who actually was involved. The victim was a known drug dealer. I had associations with him. And the actual killers, I had previous associations with them as well in the past. And so when the homicide took place, their names came up. my name came up. The police ran all of our names together in the computer database, and they had to process or go through the process of elimination, try to identify which three of these individuals committed the crime. They settled their mind on myself, Gary Goodspeed Jr., and a guy named Marcus Merle. What they failed to understand that it was actually Gary Goodspeed Sr., Gary Goodspeed Jr., and Marcus Merle, and not myself. They got it horribly wrong.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even the 4-year-old girl who lost her father, she couldn't identify you. She wasn't identifying you until later down the line. They kept on asking her to identify the people who did this. You were never identified, but then the police go to her, or the investigators, if I have this right, and literally point you out and
Yes,
say, "Are you sure it isn't him? Are you sure it
yes,
isn't him?" I mean, it's
yes,
just an insane,
yes.
insane story. So tell me, just how are you feeling when you find out, again, this happens in February, you have proof of where you are, you have a stone cold alibi. When you hear that you are a suspect and your name is being thrown in the middle of this double homicide, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
I'm thinking that they made a mistake. I did not understand our criminal justice system to that level. I didn't believe that innocent people go to prison. I always thought that people guilty, they say they didn't do it, they're trying to avoid the consequence. I did not have an understanding that innocent people go to prison. So I thought initially that this was just going to be a huge inconvenience for the day. The day's events that I had planned, they just disrupted my day. I had no idea that those actions would have disrupted 23 years of my life. I was in shock. I was in shock. And I'll say this as well. Even during the process of leading up to trial, I always believed that the truth would prevail, the truth would set you free, that the truth would come out, that I was not capable or responsible for committing this awful crime. It just didn't happen. I got convicted March 24th, 1997, and I was sentenced to 4 life sentences inside of a maximum level 5 Missouri prison.
So you're arrested and charged in May of 1996. And you get a public defender. And this public defender is reportedly overwhelmed. I guess she's 31 years old. She is young. She's overwhelmed. But there was something that really blew my mind when I was researching your case, Mr. Kidd, and I wanted to share it with the audience. You're trying to work with the public defender, like, listen, there's proof here. There's no way I could have done this. And you're calling her and you're reaching out to her, and she writes this to you in a letter of August 1996. Your public defender says, quote, "I will take one phone call from you or Monica per week." Monica is your girlfriend who you were with the entire day.
Yes.
"If I'm available. I will talk to your mother when she calls if I'm available. If you cannot live with these terms, I suggest you hire another lawyer," unquote. I read that and I just felt like, I know she's busy, I get it, but this is just sounds really heinous to me. What were your
Yeah.
thoughts in August of 96
Yeah.
as you're sitting in jail and you get this letter from her?
Yeah. I probably cried. Um, I I used to cry a lot because I just did not understand why this would happen to me and why our system wasn't working the way our system supposed to work. And you're right. Here it is. The lady who is advocating on my behalf, who should be, is telling me she don't have time. I should have known. If I knew now what I knew then, or if I knew then rather what I know now, I should have known that I was in trouble then, because she had no, she didn't have the space, she didn't have the time, she didn't have the energy or resources to adequately defend a double homicide. I believe I seen her maybe 4 to 5 hours out of the course of a year, almost a year, 11 months. 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It's not enough time to adequately defend a double homicide and an innocent man from going to prison. I was in trouble the moment I read that letter.
And you are at this point, you haven't been convicted yet, but you're arrested and charged, like I said, in May of 1996. The trial happens in March of 1997. But as a young man, 21 going on 22 years old, uh, how are you surviving even before getting convicted? I guess I'm assuming you're in a county jail, right?
I am in the county jail. Yeah.
And so how are you surviving? How are you getting by and also dealing with the mental pressure of hoping the truth is going to come out, but just your safety behind bars?
It was rough. It was rough. They had me in a module they called the gladiator wing. And the gladiator wing, the reason why they called it the gladiator wing is because those individuals was predators. Um, they were also into jumping on individuals. So I had to really outthink though, and I had no uncles, no nephews, no brothers. Usually people who end up in the county jail knows Tay Tay or Ray Ray or Bobby. I knew nobody. And so here it is, I'm inside this module, and I had to outthink individuals to make sure that I stayed safe. I did pretty swell in that area. Um, but mentally, you mentioned mentally, I suffered. I suffered in that area, and I often had suicidal ideations to the point to where they actually moved me to the suicide ward, where they had to monitor and watch me. So it was a rough go, watching my back physically and making sure that I was able to keep myself together mentally. It didn't bode well for me during those 11 months.
All right, so then we get to the trial. The trial is in March of 1997. It is a week, and the jury deliberates for an hour. But even before that, the 4-year-old is at the trial, right? And do I have this right? Was she not able to identify you at the
She
actual
was
trial?
not. She
She
was
was
not.
not able to identify. This is the only witness. She's not able to identify you. Uh, and don't they, if I have this right, don't they bring her back again and they make sure that you're sitting by your white lawyers and you and the other guy, you're the only two black folks in the room? And then she finally says those two. But this is the second time. Explain how this 4-year-old identification came about. This appeared just so much misconduct
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of correct it a little bit if I can. They did
Sure,
do
please.
that. They did bring her back a second round, and she still was not able to identify me. She did identify the other individual sitting at the table. And so the
Ah,
second round, for what you just explained, when she was not able to identify me, they were so frustrated and furious, they being the prosecutor and the police, they asked the judge, can the police come and testify to what she told them? And that brought up a whole nother issue because a witness has to be able to take the stand and confront the defendant and accuse the defendant in open court. When she failed to do that, they brought the police in, and the police essentially testified, well, that's what she told us. You cannot do that in a court of law. It became one of my issues throughout the years as I litigated, but it was some for sure, hanky panky going on at that time.
Mr. Kidden, I don't understand. Why did they bring her back a second time? I mean, first of all, I would think in a 4-year-old taking the stand is traumatizing. A 4-year-old, maybe she's 5 at this point, who saw her father killed. Why did they bring her? I didn't even know you can do that. Why did they bring a child up a second time when she already couldn't identify you? How or why were they able, or that was that just the crazy misconduct? This happens in Missouri, by
It
the
is
way.
a crazy misconduct. 54% of wrongful convictions, according to the National Registry for Exonerations, is a direct result to police and prosecutorial misconduct. So it speaks directly to that point. My prosecutor During the time of the trial, she was known, she's really known now for playing fast and loose with the facts. And she just do not like losing. I suspect once she got this trial or this case underway, she was committed to winning at any cost. And there's a lot of things that she did that cost me, the wrong person, 23 years of my life.
So is the information most folks as they're listening, they're going to ask, well, what about you going to the sheriff's office that day with your girlfriend to register
Mhm.
for to get a gun license rather, and the date February 6, 1996 is on the application. It's in the computer. Does that come out in court?
At the time of trial, it did not. It did not come out. It did not come out factually. What came out at the time of trial was the prosecutor calling in a sergeant from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department who did not even handle the application process. I believe his name was Sergeant Buffalo. So he came in, I think they did that on purpose. They could have pulled in Deputy Susan Jordan, which we found later, but during the time of trial, they brought in Sergeant Buffalo, who testified very murky that maybe it could have been mailed in, maybe it could have been faxed in, maybe somebody else sent it in. He threw out all these different scenarios for which he didn't understand himself because he don't even handle that department. We had to later find through the documents at the bottom of my police reports, my new lawyers, the Innocence Project, was able to find the badge number that belonged to Susan Jordan. We brought Susan Jordan in, of course, years later, and she testified that, wait a minute, I'm the one who handled this. I don't know what he's talking about. This most certainly wouldn't have been mailed in. Here's why. It wouldn't have been faxed in. Here's why. The fax stamp would have been at the top. And we asked people to show their ID, so couldn't anybody just bring it in. Furthermore, this is how we process gun applications. And as you see the timestamp at 1:47, the crime happened around 11:45, she reverse engineered the time the application would have came in and the time it would have came back. The mules check would have came back. She has stated, she testified under oath that Mr. Kidd would have had to been here at the time that he said he was.
Wow, this prosecutor is just, it's
Yeah,
just, it's straight out of Jim Crow. It's straight out
yeah,
of Jim Crow.
yeah.
Is the jury all white, predominantly white?
I believe there was one black jury. Yes, it was
What
11
one?
whites and one black male, if my memory serves me correctly. Yes.
All right, so I have to ask you this just through this lens for a minute. You are a young black man. You have a white prosecutor, a white woman prosecutor, a white public defender, a white judge, 11 white folks on the jury. This is 1996. You're in Missouri. I'm just wondering, were you seeing a lens of just you being a young black man at 21, 22? Like this feels like this is a setup, or were you not able to see it that way? And if not, how do you see it now in retrospect?
Yeah. At the time, no. In hindsight, yes. At the time, my mind had not been exposed to enough ills and wrongs. Cell phones were just now coming out, and for the internet had yet to blow up. And so we only was living our life in a vacuum based on my direct experience. And I didn't have a lot of direct experience of racism in my life at the time, in part because I wasn't exposed to a lot of white individuals or justice systems or systems that are ran and governed by white individuals. So no, at the time, I did not see it coming. Later, and again, in hindsight, it all makes sense because as we look through the lens of the cameras or our TVs today, all that we're seeing across the country redundantly and repetitively, we see racism, we see mass prejudice, we see these things, and I can relate it back to my situation. You're right. Here I was in a courtroom. Everybody's white. Everybody's white except for one juror. And except for the people who was watching the trial, I was in trouble and didn't fully realize it.
So again, and there's also a neighbor. This is the one thing that happens. A neighbor says that he is 2,000% sure that he saw you running from the house or whatever the case may be. And this is a black neighbor, and he's passionate when he says it. He's passionate when he says it. As you're sitting there in the courtroom and you hear this neighbor say it, uh, what what are you feeling? What are your thoughts?
My heart is pounding out of my chest. My heart beats now, even as we relive it or we rediscuss it to this extent. I could not believe it. And he was wobbly um, even during at the time of trial. And I wanted my lawyer to bust out a lot of his inconsistencies and lies to impeach him. She couldn't. She just wasn't equipped to be able to handle this serious of a case. And so I had to sit there and watch an individual who I never saw in my life identify me as being a part of the crime when there was really telltale signs early on that he was not being truthful. Subsequently, 20 something years later, we was able to bust all of that out. My new lawyers, my new legal team was able to bust all of it out to the extent to where he came clean. And 2018, this individual came to my last hearing, my very last appeal, and testified openly and honestly. He broke down on the stand. He cried. He looked out to me. He apologized for keeping me in prison all these years. And he helped expose what the police told him to do and what the prosecutor did as it relates to deals and money that they gave him.
You know, Mr. Kidd, the millisecond I read that, without even going further, I knew that's what it was. I knew the police told him that this is, I keep hearing this over and over every single week. The police tell them to say something. They work out a deal. They're sometimes intimidated to say something, and they do it, and they put somebody else behind bars. It's just so heinous.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, did your what is her name? Teresa? Was that,
Teresa Anderson.
has she ever apologized to you? Has she ever said, you know what? I really messed up? Has she ever owned up to
She
how she failed you?
She did. She did. We did. I have had an opportunity over the last 2 years to meet with her, and she did apologize. So I cannot say that it made any real difference.
Right, right.
I it's it's 23 years too late. It's 23 years too late. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you are convicted March 24th, 1997. Your original sentence is life without parole, 4 life sentences. Tell me what life was like for you behind bars in a maximum security prison.
it was scary. I remember going to the first prison of the four that I went to over the 23 years was Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. And it is where they house death row inmates. And I remember us walking in all chained and shackled together. And one of the guards said, welcome to hell, gentlemen. Welcome to hell. And it felt like that. It felt like hell. Once we got processed in the intake area, they took the handcuffs and shackles off because we was secured inside the perimeter. They assigned us to the housing unit that we would be in, this compound with various housing units. And as I walked to the housing unit I was assigned to, men were all over the yard. Uh, it was scary. They were looking. They was um, I won't even call it looking. They was mugging. Um, some of them would approach aggressively. What's your name? Do you need help? And all of that is a ruse or disguise to get up under you real quick and maybe try to snatch you up, maybe become your lover or your protector, and maybe you pay them for protecting them. So this is how they make their money. This is how they learn how to live, and we're considered fresh meat. I wasn't a bad looking gentleman coming in, and so I really had a couple more worries to consider. Uh, it was scary. It was scary. And then I had to also contend with that I'm actually serving life without the possibility of parole for somebody else's crime. So everything I endured from that day forward, I was always reminded that I am doing time for somebody else's crime. It was gut wrenching at times, my friend.
You know, it's interesting you bring up as far as the um, the fear of sexual assault because a few folks who I've spoken to, they're not comfortable talking about that, and I totally get it. I'm sure
Sure.
it's a lot. Um, I know that it's obviously really complicated. I have friends who've been behind bars and they dealt with that. Uh, how do you navigate that? How do you navigate that if you feel like people are plotting? You know, it must be just terrifying on a deeper level, especially as a young man.
By the grace of God, and I do mean by the grace of God, um, I was spared. I was spared, but I watched so many other individuals not be spared. And it's not just one individual, it's two or three. You cannot win. So I can't even come on the show and say, yeah, I was tough. I was macho. I told them, you can do that. But they'll go get two, three, or four of them and they'll run up in your cell. They'll take the belt, they'll take the socks, they'll stuff the socks in your mouth, and they will take what they came for. By the grace of God, I did not have to experience that. My authenticity, my character, individuals end up taking a genuine liking to me early on. They seen that I had a good head on my shoulders. And so that is what kind of helped me. And those individuals who didn't want anything in return, who was good made poor choices, but good individuals who said, nah, kid is cool, don't mess with him. A bunch of individuals took a liking to me and they was able to keep whatever may have been, it never really hit me, but whatever may have been coming my way, they kept a lot of until I was able to get on my own feet 2 or 3 years later. From that point on, I was able to kind of carry myself and maintain a level of respect for the next 2 decades, no matter what prison I went to. So
I should also mention before you go behind, but when you go behind bars, you have a 4-month-old daughter, right?
yes.
You have a 4-month-old daughter. Uh, as you're behind bars, especially in those beginning years, how was your family affected by this? I know you said your mother had child. I don't know if you and your mother reconnected, but how was your family affected by you? Because it's not just you; it's a whole. I think it's a whole community and family who are hurt and beat down by this. How are they affected?
Yeah, my family was devastated. And I come from a good stock. I come from a good stock. And so they did not know how to battle or how to fight with me. It's either fight or flight. They were so overwhelmed, life without the possibility of parole. They're either medium income or low income individuals. They had no finances to come to my rescue. And so although they heart poured out and they loved me, they was not in a position to do anything for me. And it hurt. It hurt. I felt abandoned. I felt isolated. Suicidal ideations began to reemerge. I used to devise plans to try to take my life before I ultimately decided that I was going to fight. It was a rough go, and they were affected. My daughter's mother, Monica, who you mentioned, she struggled immensely raising a kid by herself. Emotionally, she did not know how to contend with the love of her life being pulled away from her, serving life without parole. I thought she was abandoning me at the time, but in retrospect, she had no choice but to try to protect herself and have some normal resemblance of life. So unfortunately, she moved on, and many other people did in my life until the cavalry came some 10 years later. They saw that there was some hope and there was an opportunity, and a few of them got to peeking their head back in. I don't blame them for that. That's how disappointing, that's how despairing a wrongful conviction can be when you're dealing with medium to low income families who have no resources or know how to fight a case as such.
I should also add that your girlfriend Monica, she did testify at the trial, and bizarrely, your public defender barely did any prep for her. There was barely any prep. She wasn't prepared when they were when the prosecutor is asking her questions. So Monica did, you know, she was there with you that day. She knew
She
there was
was.
no way,
She was.
and the defender just didn't have the time.
Yeah, it just couldn't come out. It could not come out. You know, one of the things that kept me in prison for so many years legally, the legal impediments that kept me in prison is the courts. We was able to, so I got convicted in 1997. By 2007, Sean O'Brien, the Midwest Innocence Project, took interest in my case. And 2 short years later, by 2009, they had developed what really happened. And we was able to march inside of a federal court and present all of these facts. All of these facts. Here was the problem. And I want your listening audience to understand. The courts would say he may very well be innocent, but these facts were discoverable by his trial attorney in 1996. So I was losing by default. I was losing because the very facts that now proved my innocence was available at the time of trial. And she should have, though she didn't, she should have been in a position to present these facts. Therefore, Mr. Kidd must lose. Time and time again, Mr. Kidd must lose until 2018, or rather 2019, the Honorable Judge Darren Atkins had ruled in a 107-page order, no longer, no more. These facts are credible. The prosecutor did wrong. The police did not do their job, and Mr. Kidd is free to go. That's the problem that I ran into.
You mentioned Sean O'Brien, but I'd love for you to talk about him a little bit more. You've described him as your superhero. After
Yeah,
years and years of writing
yeah,
countless people, he is somebody who really got on. He really made sure that your case got the proper attention that it
yeah.
deserved, and he really changed your life. Talk to me about Sean O'Brien and the Innocence Project.
He is, yeah. Sean O'Brien is right behind me, right there in that picture. That's my absolute favorite picture. We went on PBS News Hour together when I first came home. But it was Professor Sean O'Brien who first believed in me, who first decided that he would take my case. And he convinced my case was already on the desk of the Midwest Innocence Project, but they was not fully on board because they're small staff. But when Sean O'Brien came on board and he went back to them and he said, pull that file and we're going to champion this together, he was the engine that kept me going all those years. Remember, 11 losses before I won my very last appeal. He never gave up. He never said, give me one dime. When money wasn't available through the Innocence Project or elsewhere, him and his wife and his family would go in their own pockets, and I do mean by the thousands, to make sure that the money was there to continue to litigate my case and bring me home. He most certainly is my hero. He is most certainly my hero, and I would not be here today if it wasn't for Sean O'Brien and his commitment to justice and his excellence in the law.
So you're finally released August of 2019, and here's the part that always disturbs me. At this point, you're released at 44 years old, and the state of Missouri has not compensated you a dime. This should be a federal law. You lock somebody up for 20 years, and the state of Missouri has not compensated you. How, my God, how are you? I don't even know what the question is. It's just heartbreaking.
It was no compensation. It was no apology. It was no admittance of wrongdoing, um, and it was scary. To be quite frank with you, I want to share with you and your listening audience, to any exoneree coming home after 15, 20, 25 years. I've been out of circulation. It is scary. I have no 401k. I have no a stash in the bank. I have no property. You're coming home with nothing. And even though your family might be there, when you're talking about medium to low income families, they are barely making it themselves. So they don't have disposable income to throw your way and to help you get on the feet. They may give you a couch or extra room to lay in, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do for the things that you need, the state of Missouri was not interested in being a part of that solution. It forced me, if I can be honest, it forced me to immediately try to hop on the speaking circuit. That's what I've been doing. To be able to share my story, and then maybe try to get some type of compensation in return for sharing my story. I really wanted to go peacefully somewhere, kind of get myself together, process what I've been through. I have not been able to do that. Almost 2 years later, I'm just learning how to be able to do that because I was forced to go work. Sean used to tell me, he said, Ricky, be careful, because even though you're hot on the market now and speaking and they willing to give you a few dollars, he said, though, that phone will stop ringing and those emails will stop coming, and then you're going to be back to square one. I used to think, no, not me, but I am in a space, so to speak, not too bad, but I'm in a space to where I'm realizing he's right, and I may have to consider a whole different field. The speaking circuit simply isn't consistent enough for a man who's now married, who has a child, a newborn baby. So I'm gonna have to consider doing other things, or the kindness and generosity of individuals who maybe have a heart to reach out and help. So
Yeah, I want to say, I know times are tough right now, but if you're able to, if you want to donate to Ricky Kidd after hearing this powerful story, you can go to his Cash App, which is $RND as in dog K 2022. That's RNDK 2022, and you can donate if you can. You know.
I think it's 2020. I think it's 2020.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Forgive me. It's
Mhm.
$ RNDK 2020.
Yeah.
RNDK 2020. R as in Roger, N as in Nancy, D as in David, K as in Kite 2020 on the $. So make sure that we donate, and we'll put that in the actual in the description when this goes to my YouTube page. Tell me about I Am Resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to tell you about I Am Resilience. When I came home, people used to be amazed at how upbeat I was. And I chose to be better opposed to bitter. And I exuded this energy and this strength. And they used to keep telling me, man, you are resilient. You are resilient. And everywhere I would go in the early days, I kept hearing it, to where I looked in the mirror one day and I said, I am resilient. I am resilient. And I wanted to own that. And so I started my platform, I Am Resilience. It's a motivational speaking, criminal justice reform platform where I now have the opportunity to crisscross the country and share my cautionary tale with any audience who's willing to listen. That is the core of what I Am Resilience is about. It also speaks to individuals who have gone through their own situation, maybe not a wrongful conviction, but something else, some other difficulty or challenge that may have beset anybody, anybody in the world. And so I think my message resonates with other people who feel like, you know what, I've been through something too. If you was able to get through it and be strong, I can get through it and be strong. And together we all get to be resilient. That's a part of my message as well. And I love sharing that part to anybody who's willing to listen. So I love doing that work.
Is there a website folks can go to?
There is www.resilienceMode.com. That's www.resilienceMode.com. They can go there and see a lot of what I'm up to and see what's next for me. Have some exciting projects coming down the pipeline. The Sale is a project that is going to get released this August, marking my 2-year. Freedom, the Origin of Innocence is a new tour that I'm about to start this August. Over the next year, we're going to crisscross the country and continue to spread the awareness about broken justice in America. So yeah, resilienceMode.com.
Let me ask you this before you go. There's all this talk about criminal justice reform, about reforming our prisons. There is some people who are talking about prisons should be abolished in general. What does reform look like to you?
Reform to me, I think we have to start with mass incarceration. I think that's the bigger umbrella. We have to really look at what caused us to add 2 million more individuals from the 70s. It was like 300,000. Now it's over 2.3 million. How did that happen? And begin to break that down as it relates to overcharging, over sentence. We need to decriminalize smaller offenses, drug offenses. Some of those things we've already began to do, and it has brought the number down. I think, no, it has stopped the number from increasing, not necessarily decreasing. So we stop the bleeding with those smaller things where marijuana is no longer a felon. And but we need to have more conviction integrity units across the country where prosecutors are able to review cases of anything that's gone wrong, whether that's a wrongful conviction or overcharge or an individual being overcharged. I think our governors should use more clemency power to unbloat, so to speak, our criminal justice system. I think we need to look at particular policies in the space of criminal, or rather in the space of wrongful convictions. You have snitch testimony, which contributed in my case, needs to be qualified. I'm hopping on a hearing here on July 22nd with some state reps about getting a snitch bill passed in the state of Missouri. They're passed in other states, but these are the things that can help turn around our criminal legal system and the woes that we face. It's gonna be in policy. Innocence projects are important. They're so important. There's 68 inside the Innocence Network. I'm now on the board of that Innocence Network, continue to do great works, but it's gonna be in policy, legislation, education, and training. I wanna say this real quick before I go as well. October 11th, I'll be going back inside the same district attorney's office in Jackson County that convicted me to train their office on the cost of a prosecutor's decision. And so education and awareness is important across all fronts if we're ever going to see any real change.
What do you think about people who believe that prisons should be abolished? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't subscribe to that notion, to be quite frankly, not that far. I wouldn't go that far to think prisons need to be abolished. I did 23 years there, and I was around a bunch of individuals who made poor choices, who learned from their choices, and should be deserving of a second chance. I often say everybody wants a second chance, but nobody wants to give one. On the other half of that equation, I also was around individuals who were not done. They were not done with their stinking thinking. They was not done victimizing, and they could not wait. They could not wait for another bite at freedom, so they continue their rampage. I do not think prisons need to be abolished. We will be setting ourselves up, and the people in our community will be setting them up for safety, serious safety issues. I do believe that there need to be an overhaul, a real serious overhaul, and I do believe our prison industrial complex imprint could be significantly reduced. Abolishing it, I'm just not prepared to go that far. And that's from a person who's been wrongfully convicted, but that's also from a person who lived on the inside. And a good portion of those individuals are not ready. They're not ready. What would you do with those type of minded individuals, those violent minded, seriously criminal minded individuals who just would take advantage of a society that didn't have a prison as a consequence? I'm not ready for that. I don't think a lot of us are. I think a portion of that conversation is more emotional and it's more rhetoric than it is practical.